Well, finally, the last little bit that I'll talk about is another thing we hear a lot about, and that is the American Indians were great environmentalists. And the usual implication of this is that you, being non-Native Americans, are all pretty much terrible environmentalists, and you should be ashamed of yourselves compared to these people. Now, I am not saying this to disparage or make light of or make fun of American Indians. That's not in any way my intention. In fact, my view is that people who want to hold these people up as models of environmentalism are themselves really treating these people like children. I mean, they're not treating them like human beings. They're treating them like cardboard cutouts that they can use as bludgeons to bash the rest of us over the head with. They couldn't care less what the Indians actually did. They don't know anything about it, most of them. So, for example, one of the great scholars of environmentalism, Al Gore, was a... Now, that was cheap, totally cheap. But Al Gore, in his book Earth in the Balance, which came out when I was in college, he cited a speech from the 19th century Chief Seattle, who was in the Pacific Northwest. And in this speech, Chief Seattle talks about every single pine needle, every bug being sacred to him and his people. And, you know, Al Gore is saying, if only we could get back to this. Well, it turns out this speech is totally phony. It was made up in the 1970s. The 1970s, like 100 years later, by a screenwriter named Ted Perry from Texas. Now, Perry just sort of, made up the speech, how he imagined it would have been, what this guy might have said. And then he saw that people were using it as if they were Chief Seattle's words. So Perry spent the rest of his career going around telling people, I made that speech up. I'm really sorry to break this to you, but I made that speech up. Well, Gore doesn't know this, so he's repeating it like this is from Indian wisdom. And this one speech bears a tremendous amount of the argumentative burden to prove that the Indians were all environmentalists. Well, the guy made it up. So anyway, Perry, this poor guy Ted Perry, makes up this speech, and he goes through his life thinking, well, maybe I've made good, I've tried to overturn this mistake. Well, there's a children's book that hits number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list called Brother Eagle, Sister Sky, written by some author, based on the phony Chief Seattle speech. He's going, oh, gosh, I can't. Then one day, Ted Perry is sitting in his own church, and his pastor gets up and says, as Chief Seattle said, he said, I can't believe this is happening. This can't be happening. So it just keeps going on and on. Well, earlier versions of the speech that we have are dubious for reasons of their own that I don't have time to get into, but I do talk about in the 33 Questions book. But when you look at it more closely, he's not saying every inch of ground everywhere is sacred to my people, such that we can only daintily touch it. He's not saying that. He's saying that specifically this land is sacred to us because our ancestors are buried here. Well, that's a very different thing from saying that land in general is a holy and sacred thing and no one can touch or do anything with it. So were the American Indians environmentalists? Well, like most people, they were good in some areas and bad in others. They were not, in fact, cardboard cutouts. They were not, in fact, ideological little creatures to be exploited by leftists today. They were actually real human beings, believe it or not. They were actual people. So yeah, they did do some bad things. They engaged in slash and burn agriculture. They wiped out entire animal populations because they were on the assumption that any animals that they killed in a hunt would be reanimated. So they didn't worry about killing animal populations. And they destroyed forests and grasslands. But at the same time, they were good environmental stewards in exactly the opposite way that we've been taught. We've been taught that the American Indians didn't know anything about property, right? We heard this a million times. And that the white man comes along and says, this is mine, and the Indian scratches his head. What could you mean mine? Everything is in common. Well, that's not true. First of all, American Indians are extremely diverse and have very varying approaches to the idea of property, for one thing. But by and large, one of the reasons that you might see some Indians having a view of property that is relatively communal is that these were Indians who lived in areas of tremendous abundance. So like right now, air exists in such great abundance, we don't have property rights in it. We don't argue about it. I don't say, hey, wait a minute, you were just breathing my air, you jerk. Like we wouldn't say, it doesn't make any sense. Well, likewise, if you're living in an extremely sparsely populated area, who cares? Sure, you use that land, I'll use this land, who even cares? But as things grow more and more scarce, then you start to see various tribes working out some type of property title arrangement and assignment. So again, they were actual people, okay? They actually thought this through. And so what they would do is, when they would find that game is becoming scarce, well, they would assign property rights. They'd say, this tribe can hunt in this area, this tribe can hunt in this area. And that protects against overhunting. Because if we just say, okay, everybody, it's every man for himself, just go kill whatever you want to kill, well, everybody will just think, well, I better just go kill any animal I can, because any animal I don't kill will be killed by somebody else, and this is my only chance to get it. No one thinks about tomorrow. They just think, I got to just get when the getting's good. But if my tribe has care of this area in terms of hunting, well, we have an incentive not to kill every single animal now, because then what are we going to do next year? We have an incentive to preserve some for the future. And so we guard our property rights. We make sure that other people, poachers, don't come in and just start killing arbitrarily. No, because that hurts us, because then we won't have anything for next year. So they used basically property rights, in effect, to conserve in areas like this, whether it was salmon or livestock or whatever. And so this is, and just one last thing on this point, and then I'll wrap up, is that very recently in Wyoming, the Arapahoes on the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming have been riding around on all-terrain vehicles, just killing animals everywhere and just wiping out animal populations. And so what happened to their spiritual kinship with nature? Well, here's what happened to it. There's no incentive for them not to do that. There are no property rights in that land or to those animals. So might as well kill them all now, because since I can't privatize the land, I can't reap the benefits of preserving anything for the future, because it doesn't belong to me. I got to just kill them all now. So in other words, the Indians responded to incentives. Again, they're people. They responded to incentives. But they show us that you can use property rights to preserve species and preserve the environment. So it's in fact the very thing we're told the Indians knew nothing about, namely private property rights. It's that very institution that they used to protect the environment. So they were environmentalists, but not in the way we're typically told. All right. Well, I'm already over the time, so I'll just simply leave you with this. We haven't actually mentioned today that the Mises Institute promotes something called the Austrian School of Economics. It's a school, it's not a building, it's a school of thought that is the oldest consistently existing school of economic thought, probably the smallest right now, but the fastest growing, because we have the fewest stooges in the Austrian school. We have the fewest bootlickers. Our economists don't want to go to Washington and tell them whatever they want to hear. We tell them the opposite of what they want to hear, which is why no one invites us to Washington. But the Austrian school, these are the economists who predicted the crash we're going through now, who predicted the Great Depression at a time when they were laughed at, where they were told that this is a time of permanent prosperity. In fact, Irving Fisher said that stocks had reached a permanently high plateau about 3 seconds before the stock market crash came. So there are people who are interested in what we're saying more and more. It's the Austrian School of Economics in particular that can help to keep you from being clueless, so that you won't be just another one of these drones who repeats what's said on MSNBC, who says, oh, we just need to give more power to our wise overlords. That's what they want you to be. Man, there is nothing they would like more than to see you young people become a bunch of drones who just repeat what they hear at some presidential press conference and say, oh, we must do whatever our wise leader says, and whatever. That's what they want. Don't think. That's exactly what they want. But what the Mises Institute challenges you to do is the opposite, is to think, is to listen to people who are out of fashion, because those are the ones who typically are right. The bootlickers are very much in fashion, and they told us everything was just super in the middle of 2007. And they're telling us things are turning around and they're going to be just great within 10 minutes. You know, at some point, you got to say, I don't care what those people think. I want to follow the people who have said what is true, who have pursued the truth, regardless of what it meant for their careers, because they believe in the truth and they want to understand the world as it really is, not how politicians want it to be. So I hope you'll join us. Thank you very much.